Well, my chat's going to be a little bit different than the other folks. What we do in Knowledge Exchange is we take the research that's done by my colleagues and research that's done across Canada in different countries, and we talk about, we do summaries, but we also take what comes from that knowledge and translate that, is the exchange part, into things that we think would be helpful to the general public. And so what we see here is we do actually a number of things like the Here to Help BC.ca. We have a number of resources that are part of that. We have a number of different kinds of things that folks can pick up and use outside. But we see this as a really, as Karen pointed out, a cultural moment. It's a time when things are changing, and it's a significant change in Canada. As Adam had said, we are only the second country to absolutely legalize cannabis. And so what we would talk about and what we would say is that, let's see, it is an opportunity. And it's a huge opportunity that from between today and tomorrow, we take like a very pragmatic and sort of a harm reduction kind of focus in many ways. People are smoking cannabis today, and they're going to be smoking cannabis tomorrow. So what can we do, and what can we talk about? How can we leverage what we know and the people around us to help have a conversation, which is a dialogue, about what does cannabis mean to us as individuals? What are we going to use it? How is it in our families, in the schools? We're currently preparing some guides for Ministry of Health. How are we going to deal with that in the schools and in our communities? And relationships are a key asset. And no, this is not a counseling course, right? But this is what we have. This is what we have, and all of us have in our everyday lives. And we have a lot of different ideas, even among us as researchers. We have different ideas about cannabis and whether or not it can cause psychosis or not. So that's not all clear, that's not all laid out. But what we have is we have to live with each other, and we have to deal with each other on a daily basis. And how can we use this moment, this time, the legalization of this drug, to continue those conversations and have meaningful conversation? So we talk about dialogue, and we have a specific approach to dialogue. So to dialogue is to inquire and to learn, to integrate perspectives, to uncover and examine assumptions. We discussion and debate very different kinds of things: telling, selling, justifying. We're looking to try to encourage folks to understand each other and talk to each other, rather than just say, well, this is what I think, and just stick with the facts. We all have the facts. There's lots of facts to be had. But what's meaningful is dialogue, the principles of dialogue. So how do we make use of what's going on in our families? How do we take what we know, the basic kinds of things that we know, and how do we integrate these? That in a family when you have children and youth, is that thing that you trade on with them, and what you have is that relationship with your young people, or the relationship with the people who are caregivers, with your family, with your friends. And how can we then, especially with young folks, how can we bring them to actually come to us when they have questions, so that we can actually talk about what's going on, and they might elect to come and speak with us before they actually decide to use. And we can have those kinds of conversations with folks. Because using cannabis, using any drug, is not separate from the context in which we live, in the communities, the families. We're not separate from that. And that part tends to go on for a while. But what we can do is, like I said, keep talking about it. So empathy, diversity, understanding power, and promoting curiosity and learning, and exposing judgments and assumptions. So we do encourage people to engage in dialogues, and we're also carrying out a number of cannabis dialogues in different places in the province, and opioid dialogues, where we bring people from communities in together, from changing the cultures of substance use on campuses, to come together to actually talk about what's important to them. What do they need to know? What kinds of information do they want to have? And to strategize together about what might be important for them as individuals or as a campus, for example, in developing a policy around substance use or around cannabis use for their particular university. I wish I had a glass of water. Okay. So then, in terms of cannabis and a dialogue, here's what we might have to talk about. So we have like a two-axis kind of thing. Now, I don't know how readable that is because it's a picture of something we're just working on, of the potential harms and benefits of cannabis use. So that we know that tomorrow there's legalization for recreational or non-medical use, but it has been, cannabis has been legal for medical use since 2001, I believe it is. So we look at potential harms and benefits. So if harm goes left to right and potential benefit goes up and down, you know that curiosity or experimental use tends to have a lower potential for benefit and less potential for harm. Whereas this is medical use for short-term pain, for nausea, sometimes for folks who are having cancer treatments, for example. That has been shown to help increase appetite. So there's less potential for harms and higher potential for benefits. But when you get towards the right, for example, where there is medical use, but for long-term use, for example, potentially long-term use for pain, there's a higher risk of harm, and a higher risk of harm and lower for benefit. Or if people are using cannabis, for example, in youth, research has shown that youth that use cannabis for example, to deal with uncomfortable feelings and deal with emotions tend to have more difficulties. They tend to be higher users and use it more often, and that can lead to harms. So we have a little saying we use called not too much, not too often, and in safe place. And that's the sort of thing that we look at for trying to encourage folks to do that. So we lay out these kinds of ideas for youth and their families, for parents, and lay these out, what we know in terms of the evidence, and then situate that in how can we talk about that? How can we engage? And so at this point, we look not just for, as I said, for youth and families, but we're looking for the wider community and putting out some ideas that we have about how to engage people in the wider communities. How do we want our schools to look? Not just outside the legal, because there is all the legal aspects around and having a school or within a certain distance of the school. But there's other kinds of things that we can control. And what kind of an attitude, what kind of a culture do we want to have in our schools, and how we want to be in our communities, for example? How do we want, people have a whole range of attitudes, a whole range of levels of use. Well, we want them to be included, be part of the dialogue. Is that now that cannabis is legal, how can we make that more inclusive? And that the discussions that we have around cannabis can be only one place of a whole range of discussions that you can have in terms of critical thinking about the issues and how we might move forward and create kinds of communities and living situations that we all might want to live. So that's the frame that we take. Right, this is one of my favorite. It's about dialogue. Passionately committed to our own and passionately committed to understanding. Introduce a way that remains open to inquiry. And that's basically my one main point. Resources, here to help bc.ca. As I said, we have a number of resources on that. the CISUR's website, cannabis.gov, is actually that cannabis clarity, and then from the federal government.
Thank you.